If you can dream it, you can do it. Walt Disney. Welcome to the Guyana Dialogue. I'm your hostess, Shamisa Ali. A pleasant good evening to everyone joining us on Facebook and on YouTube. Tonight, our heart aches at the tragic loss of some of our finest men in uniform that has served our country. On behalf of my entire team here at the Guyana Dialogue, our condolences to the families. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. We have prepared a video to enlighten you on the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy. Please take a look.
A day after Venezuela's authorities said voters had overwhelmingly approved the takeover of an oil-rich region in neighboring Guyana, a victorious President Nicolás Maduro vowed to abide by the will of the people and attacked those, he said, were trying to undermine the results.
To the right-wingers who support ExxonMobil, the financed right wing that supports the rights of Guyana and not those of Venezuela, I tell them we are moving forward. This referendum is binding and I will comply with the mandate of the people. The people's voice is sacred. The voice of the people is the voice of God.
Venezuelan election authorities said 95% of the 10.5 million votes they have counted were in favor of creating a new Venezuelan state in the Essequibo, a densely forested region that Venezuela says was stolen when the border was drawn more than a century ago. But some Venezuelans remain skeptical.
Everything they said is a lie, because I passed by several polling centers and everything was always empty. I don't know where they got that number of people who supposedly voted for the Essequibo.
The government promoted the referendum for weeks, calling it an act of patriotism and using it as a way to gauge Maduro's support ahead of next year's presidential election. Venezuela's long claimed the area, but tensions only increased after large deposits of oil were found in 2015. On Monday, the U.S. State Department said it supported a negotiated settlement.
We support a peaceful resolution of the border dispute between Venezuela and Guyana. The 1899 award determined the land boundary between Venezuela and Guyana should be respected unless or until the parties come to a new agreement or a competent legal body decides otherwise. This is not something that will be settled by a referendum.
It's unclear what steps the Venezuelan government will take to follow through on the result. But any action is likely to be met with international condemnation. In the meantime, Maduro's rhetoric is keeping Guyana on edge. Alessandra Ampietti, Al Jazeera.
Tonight, we will have a discussion on the impact of Venezuela referendum results on Guyana's sovereignty, historical and social landscape. The Guyana Dialogue is being sponsored by a coordinating council of Guyanese based in the US, UK, Canada, Guyana, and the Caribbean. Funding support is by well-known philanthropist Dave Narain from Dave West Indian Imports. Please welcome my moderator for tonight, Dr. Tara Singh.
Thank you very much,
Our
Shamisa.
panelists tonight. Good evening, Dr. Tara. Please welcome our panelists, Professor Narain Prasad and Dr. Gangaram Das. Professor Mahindra Hariraj will join us shortly, as well as our guest for tonight, Joel Bhagwandin. Right now, here is our panel. Oh, my apologies, Mahindra, welcome.
Yeah.
All right, Dr. Tara, please go ahead.
And you forget Professor Muniram Budu.
Professor Muniram Budu.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Shamisa, and welcome to our viewers and welcome to the panelists. Before I start, I just want to indicate that we should focus not much discussion centered around the historical and cultural aspects of this problem. For example, the history does not show that Venezuela ever occupied Essequibo. So we have a lot of evidence, and I hope that our panelists can delve into this. As you know, the Dutch West India Company had owned Essequibo from 1616 to 1792. From 1792 to 1814, the Dutch government owned and controlled Essequibo, and in 1814 it was acquired by the British government, and in 1831 they combined to form the colony of British Guyana. Now, I just want you also to reflect on some of the names in the Essequibo region. None is Spanish. All are Dutch or Amerindian in origin. Secondly, I think it may be useful to have a little insight into the rebellion that occurred in January of 1969 when part of the ranchers there tried to secede from Guyana. That rebellion was quelled after a few days. But the interesting thing about that, the people who engaged in that rebellion were trained, were given military training in Venezuela. And presumably, I don't know whether it's the government, but they were given training. And then, even when the rebellion was crushed, all them rushed to Venezuela where to get refuge there. And none of them was ever brought to justice. As a matter of fact, the leader of that, Valerie Hart, who's a descendant of the Melville family, she escaped to Venezuela, and after then, she called upon the government of Venezuela to assert their right over Rupununi and Essequibo. So I just want to set up to start the discussion so we can focus a little on the geography, the history, and the culture, and then we're going to explore other implications. So, Professor Budu, you want to take a shot for us?
Okay. Yes. First of all, I want to call on all Guyanese, regardless of where you are and what your political affiliation is, to support the Guyana government in its defense of the territorial integrity of Guyana against Venezuela's flagrant disregard for international law and its bonkers claim to Guyana's Essequibo region. This region is over 70% of Guyana, and it has exceptional natural beauty and superior potential for sustained economic development. In the 70s, I spent several months in the Essequibo region working on the feasibility study for the Tibuku hydroelectric project. This was a very massive hydroelectric project that was going to supply electricity not only to Guyana, but to some other regions within the Western Hemisphere. This project was actually located in the upper Mazaruni River. I was able to see over that several months many parts of this exquisite region. And personally, I can't bear to see Venezuela stealing it from us. The 1899 arbitral award delineating the border between Guyana and Venezuela is a legal instrument that Venezuela accepted for many decades. On December the 3rd, which will be a historically infamous day in the Western Hemisphere, and in particular Venezuela, Maduro decided to steal Guyana's Essequibo region. Media pundits have suggested a myriad of reasons why Maduro did what he did and decided to violate the ruling of the International Court of Justice. Now, what I've seen, these reasons vary from gauging his support in upcoming elections to being a madman. Guyana should not be concerned with whatever reason Maduro gave or the reasons are for his actions. Rather, the government of Guyana, the opposition, and all Guyanese must rally support to kick Maduro out of Guyana's Essequibo region. My view is that President Ali and his government are making all the correct moves, from unifying the country to seeking advice and support from the international community. The international community must not make Maduro get away with this step. He must be taught a lesson so that other despotic dictators do not try to take other people's property. That's plain and simple. And I think I'll stop there for now and get a historical
Yeah,
perspective from the other panel.
yeah. Okay, Professor Budu, thank you very much. I just want to mention too that there was a posting by Dr. Chris Rampasad, which covers quite a lot of bases on this matter. If people have time, they should go online and try to read up on that. It's very informative. Now let's go to Professor Mahin. You want to make a
Sure,
shot?
sure.
Go ahead.
And good evening, everyone. Good evening, Dr. Tara.
Hmm.
Just to build on the context that you and Professor Buru has already
Hmm.
established, I think at this juncture, we have to give the Guyana government, as Dr. Buru, Professor Buru said, a lot of support in the level of diplomacy they have engaged with around this sensitive issue. There have been a plethora of information circulating this issue and controversy at the global level. But to add to the historical context, as you said, coming from the Dutch and then the arbitral award in 1899, what is critical to note, again, maybe ad nauseum at this point, is as Venezuela had participated in that delineation of the boundaries and then went awry at a particular point in time, contending that that is not the case and questioning Essequibo as being theirs. What is more pressing is the stance from this referendum, which the International Court of Justice has clearly outlined it that both countries should not, provoke a situation and keep the status quo. However, Maduro, for his notorious totalitarian dictatorship behavior, has shown a clear disregard for international law and for diplomacy. And this is really a major concern for the region, as all Guyanese, all Caribbean community nations, even nations part of feel is troubled by this. Every news agency you put on or outlet has some level of information because it is an area of concern, not only because of the strategic vicinity that it is sharing with the CARICOM nation and the United States, but it has been a region, as we have been hearing, of peace. Maduro's approach has really turned the region of a focus for the wrong purposes. And early in the video, you would have saw that this notion of 95% of the population voting in favor of this referendum is a clear indication of his manipulation of facts. And those are some of the things that we have to be concerned about because he's coming from this as from a nationalistic perspective, utilizing a particular narrative and rhetoric where he is looking to consolidate power, which has economic motivation, historical claims that he's just trying to spin and deflect from the real issue, which is the economic turmoil that Venezuelans are facing, the pressures he have as to retain his power at all costs. And these are some of the reasons he, I believe, is strategically employing these reckless declaration to provoke and to promulgate trouble in the region, which he knows he cannot substantiate in a legitimate court. As we have seen, they have played a blatant disregard for international diplomacy. So, given the historical context, given where the ICJ has stood and the United Nations said that is the means to resolve this matter, Venezuela, through Maduro, single handedly is peddling a line that is very dangerous. But I strongly believe he's doing so knowingly that his only ticket in the next general election that Venezuela has is through this rhetoric and this intimidation of claiming Essequibo. As we know, Essequibo, Dr. Budu outlined it, is rich in mineral. It's a beautiful area of our country, Guyana, and it's about two-thirds of our country. So, one, we have to recognize, firstly, this approach is very tactical from Maduro, but it will not withstand in a court of law. We also have to embrace the strategies the Guyana government has employed from a diplomatic standpoint. Earlier today, the vice president spoke about the engagement they have made, and we have to support those things and recognize they have to be done in a strategic manner. Not everything that happens has to be in the public domain at this point in time.
All right, thank you very much, Professor. Just to reinforce the point you made, the opposition leader in Venezuela, Maria Machado, said that this whole exercise is a distraction from the collapse of the economy. 360% inflation. By 1997, they were producing 2.4 million barrels of oil per day. Now they're just producing around 750,000 barrels of oil per day. Now over to Professor Narayan Prasad, your initial comments.
Professor Narayan, if you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now.
Yes, I
Go ahead.
Perfect.
Yes. No, what I was going to say is that the previous comments are very valid, and that if you go back into the colonial history of exploration, Dr. Tara, you touched on something that the Dutch had governed Guyana. And so if we go from that perspective, what we would see, those of us who are old enough, educated in Guyana, we learn about Kaikoveral and the search for the golden city of El Dorado and all of that. So even during that time, when you look at the Hispanic conquest, the Dutch conquest, and the British conquest, they were exclusive in terms of the territorial areas in which they were exploring. And even during that time, Guyana was not contested terrain, not by the Dutch, not by the Spanish, not by the French. It was the Dutch that occupied those areas. So what is contentious today are the boundary lines between Guyana and Venezuela. And that contestation started only after, as Dr. Boudou said, as Dr. Muniram said, that it was after the 1899 agreement where they had to formalize the territorial boundaries of the colonial nations, of the colonial territories. Now, let's fast forward here. What you see Maduro is doing, and what Mahendra pointed out, is that the internal disenchantment with the Maduro regime has forced him to look for enemies without. When I say enemies without, I mean outside of Venezuela. The German social scientist George Simmel said, for you to solidify support internally within the group, you have to find an external enemy, and that will quickly solidify the kind of support that you're looking for. Because of the disenchantment with the Maduro's regime over the years and the poverty that he has caused in Venezuela, he has to look for an alternative to scapegoat. And Guyana is the obvious choice. mainly because, one, he would like to expand his powers beyond Venezuela, and Guyana produces the resources whereby the control of those resources will bring him the economic relief that he's looking for in Venezuela. Now, given his political inclinations, which is to hang on to power, even to the point where every resistance has to be quelled, he has to forcefully, as Che Guevara said. Che was one of the, as you know, was one of Castro's confidant, and he said every opposition will create the resistance. So you have to strengthen your resistance to the opposition force in order to conquer them. This is one way where Maduro is using his leverage of externalizing the problem that he has internally so that he can solidify his support within his own country. And he will not stop as long as he is not achieving success. Mahendra pointed out that when you look at the referendum that he held, that it was sparsely supported. That's an indication where he will continue his aggressive forces so that he can gain control over his own population. So while he's looking to invade Guyana, internally he's losing support. So one should not think that only because Guyana is trying to solidify external support in its favor, Maduro has to be cognizant of the kind of internal problems that he's suffering, as you have seen, or we have seen in Latin America, in many of the countries, going back to the days of Juan Perón, and even when Pinochet overthrew Allende and what happened to him. So all of these things, one should not be oblivious to them, and we should not be carried away that Maduro will just walk into Guyana and seize territory.
All right, thank you, Professor. We have some important historical landmarkers, as I would say, after the boundaries were delineated in 1905. Then, on the forced independence of Venezuela in 1911. Remember, Venezuela declared independent from Gran Colombia in 1811. So 100 years afterward, they had a big celebration, and the Minister of Internal Affairs authenticated that agreement and the boundary lines as well. And 20 years later, in 1931, Brazil, Venezuela, and British Guyana went to the summit of Mount Roraima, where they launched the Tri-Junction Monument there. One the amazing thing is that while the Brazil side and the Venezuelan side is okay with the plaques and thing, the Guyana side has been effaced. There's a point made by Sir Sridhar Ramphal. But you can see picture how the Guyana side is defaced. Venezuela feel by destroying evidence, they can weaken the case. Anyhow, so let's focus. I know some of you know about the maps that they've been drawing, and then they themselves issue stamps showing the legitimate boundary of Guyana. So let's go back to Professor Buru.
Well, I want to make a point regards history, Tara. You know, my view is that any historical perspective prior to 1899, arbitrary war with Venezuela signed, is only of academic interest because Venezuela signed that agreement in 1899, delineating where the border is, right? And any other history that was there is now conveniently should be lost, right? because it's irrelevant, right? They agreed to that border. Then that border was surveyed, right? And then decades later, then they are making some make up some story, right? Now, the media, for example, and I know some government officials in Guyana have reported that the claim that Venezuela is making is a dispute or a controversy. My understanding is that Venezuela is alleging that Guyana as Cuba region was part of a Spanish colonial Venezuela. Why stop at the Spanish colonials? Did people not live in the Esquivel region before the Spanish arrived? I say yes, they did, and their ancestors are now Guyanese and still live there. So this claim by Maduro gang is not a dispute or a controversy, but a bizarre allegation. And I think we need to dispense with such terms as dispute or controversy and frame the claim as an allegation, because there's no basis for that claim. And you cannot go and look at history prior to 1899 because that award was signed then. So we have to look from 1899 onwards what happened. And the only thing that happened is that Venezuela made this bizarre claim, right? And they have nothing to back it up, right? And that's what focus should be.
Okay, Professor Mahin, back to you.
Just to add, I know Dr. Tario opened the dialogue with talking about the Dutch relationship or the stemming from the Dutch. I believe it was 1814 when you had the Anglo-Dutch Treaty between Great Britain. So to preface what Dr. Muniram is saying is if you're starting the claim, everything prior to 1899, again, is for academic or just for conversation, because as I indicated earlier, as of 1899, you participated in the boundaries being delimited. So everything from there on, it's now a matter of fact. And I like what Dr. Muniram said. It is basically changing the terminology. It's not a controversy, it's an allegation of claim that is not going to be is not being substantiated. Because if you had an objection, why participated in the initial agreement, right? Then come hundreds of years later and drum up trouble again. It is a clear indication that even if you had, as we do have, the 1899 award as the agreement that is of substance and that is enforceable, which is utilizing terms as sporadic and intact. Maduro and his and all of these events that has occurred, I don't believe, and this is one of the things that has been troubling me, and I hope the panel speaks about it a little. Given where we are today, I think, as I indicated, this is a strategic tactic from Maduro. As Dr. Narayan said, and solidifying my point, to deflect the internal troubles that Venezuela has. What I am troubled by is, given where the International Court of Justice is and all that Maduro is doing, we know that the 1899 is what is very substantive. My question or my concern is, now with all that he's doing in the region of unrest and creating uncertainties and drumming up trouble, and this is from a dictatorial perspective, because he has no intent, I believe, to step away, because he has essentially nothing to lose, and all of this is politically motivated, economically motivated. My concern is, I know the court is of competent jurisdiction. Is Maduro looking here for some level of concession or resolution by squeezing Guyana into an outcome that is favorable for him? That's what I am a bit thinking, that he knows he doesn't have anything of substance, and Venezuela, as of 1899 onwards, belongs to Guyana, has been established. I think what his position is to intimidate Guyana with his allies and his rhetoric, that is nationalistic rhetoric of Guyana being theirs. But other than that, if you look at the historical context leading up to 1899 and thereafter, Venezuela has been dormant leading up to and thereafter. And then at sporadic intervals, when Venezuela is in trouble or it's heading into a particular political regime, they turn on this tune of Essequibo being theirs. And it's a convenient sort of messaging that we have to set aside
Yeah,
permanently.
yeah. There's a good point you're raising, but the trouble with Maduro, he's so unpredictable. You can never know from where he's coming. But if you notice his release today, they're saying that the 1966 Geneva Agreement is what should bind them and what discussion should revolve around. And they blame Guyana for going to the International Court of Justice. So that might answer your point. The other thing is they were always, since this controversy or the allegation started, they always wanted to develop joint development. They started with the Mazaruni project. The PNC had to abandon that. And recently, they started a joint project with Trinidad because they had argued historically too that Trinidad was part of them, and through some earthquake they get separated. So now they are trying desperately. Probably there's something we can look at. But my point when I started historical thing was not so much about the 1899 award. The historical thing was to demonstrate a fundamental point that Venezuela is making, that they had occupied the territory, it belongs to them, and they own. So this historical record is very important to establish. No, they never did. And that is something that Professor Naring touched upon too. So that is what we are not saying to open back. That was a settled. The U.S. State Department said that is settled. The only way they will revisit if the two countries agree. So, okay, over to you, Professor Narayan. Go ahead.
Professor Narayan, please unmute.
I'm sorry. For some reason, I keep go back. My computer
okay.
keeps going back. But
Go
Dr.
ahead.
Tara, I agree with you, and I only partially agree with Dr. Muniram because we cannot be dismissive of history. To be dismissive of history is to deny the relevance of the past. Yes, the 1899 agreement set the tone for the boundary lines that was disputed today. That does not stop Maduro because he can go back. What historical evidences are there for Maduro to make his claim? Yes, the Dutch, the British, and the Hispanics and Spain decided on the boundaries, which resulted in what we see today. We have to think if you dismiss history, you're dismissing a very important part of a country's existence. So we are, in fact, we should be concentrating on what Maduro is doing today and what his intent is. His intent is premised on his loss of support, as we are all in agreement with. Internal support. When internal support dwindles, you have to look for a common enemy. In this case, Guyana is an objective enemy because Guyana has the resources that Maduro is envious of. And the acquisition of these resources will not only alleviate the internal economic problems that he is having, but will also ensure his dominance within the region. So we have to take these things into consideration as Maduro is acting. Because so far, he is like a lone ranger within the boundaries of his own people and externally as well. And so he has to neutralize that level of discontent by finding a common enemy. And that is what we should focus on today. What is driving Maduro to deny not only the 1899, but the court rule, the recent court's ruling, and continue to concoct fictitious support for himself? This is in desperation, and this is what needs to be focused on if we are going to have some kind of resolve on this boundaries.
All right, thank you, Professor. I just want to make another point. In 1961, when Venezuela raised this matter with Premier Dr. Jagan told him, okay, if you feel that the agreement was made with false data or inaccurate data, go and produce your evidence and we can have a look at that. And they did went to the archives in London and they couldn't find any evidence. So anyhow, back over to you, Professor Boudou.
Yeah, I want to comment on what Professor Prasad said and also Professor Hanraj. You know, my suggestion about the history is not to be dismissive of it, but the focus should not be on that. The focus should be, as Professor Narayan said, the intent, but in addition to intent, the action of Maduro, right? We don't want to give him any more any credibility at all, right? About his history and talk about the history prior to 1899. But we must be prepared to address that issue should that be something that we have to do later on. Now, with regards to Professor Hanraj, I think he alluded to the fact that, you know, we have to be very careful of his intended action. The question is, what should be done, right? I believe that as a result of Maduro's blatant disregard for the recent ICJ rulings, the ICJ should speed up the case and come to a final decision on the merits of Venezuela's allegation and let Guyana get on with developing its Essequibo for the benefit of Guyanese. In the meanwhile, UN must immediately implement actions in its charter following a breach of the ICJ rulings. And I think these are the actions that needs to be taken right away. Because if we allow people like Maduro to get away with things like this will open a can of worms throughout the world. And so the world needs to take action right away.
I think everybody agree with you on that. As a matter of fact, the UN Security Council is meeting tomorrow, and they have an emergency meeting of CARICOM leaders tomorrow as well. So that is very important. I also share your view that the ICJ should really expedite a ruling to make the final judgment, not wait till next year, April. That's too long. We should have, this case is really, really urgent. As a matter of fact, there was an interview with Steve Forbes, who's, you know, is the editor-in-chief of the famous magazine Forbes, this afternoon, and I posted it around. And he was saying that the Biden administration should make available drones and some missiles to Guyana. He said that this afternoon. So other people are seeing the urgency that you speak about. Okay, Professor Mayen.
Dr. Singh, let me make another point here.
Okay, go ahead.
I think Guyana must take note of those international partners who not only voiced their support, but who have gone beyond words to protect it and to restore Essequibo was rightfully ours. And I think that is a very important thing that Guyana has to know. That just saying we support you is not enough.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
Professor Mahin.
Dr. Muniram, I can disagree with you any of the points you made there about the proactive measures the region or Guyana seeks. However, I think this is perhaps, to use an analogy, a chess match. You got to be careful of the moves you make.
Hmm?
So while we all want the assurance of the international community on Guyana's side, I think provoking Maduro also has to be factored in, because he has already demonstrated he has no regard for the International Court of Justice or the rule of law. So while we seek measures from our allies, I think that is going to exacerbate an already fragile situation. And that is why early in the show I said we have to give recognition to the level of diplomacy and the way it has been done. But I agree with you. We can't just rely upon, yes, we have your support, and it's not translated in a level of action. I fully endorse that point. But what we have to do and the way we do it has to be very, very importantly done in a very strategic mannerism.
Yeah.
Because the last thing we want is to make the situation worse. Because the International Court of Justice had made it very clear on both sides, Venezuela and Guyana, not to provoke or to change the dynamics of the outcome. But to that point, as Dr. Tara said, the International Court of Justice now should look at what's going on and say this matter is of critical importance and rule on it sooner. The thing that we have to also gauge with an earlier ruling is that the earlier ruling, as we all will hope, and we from the evidence suggesting it will be in Guyana's favor, would that also cause another chain of events? So we have to make sure that, yes, we want a proactive level of measures from our allies, and we want to see tangible things in the region, but we have to be in a level that is strategic. We have to, as the word Dr. Narayan used, a madman, for example, in the region, we got to make sure that we are very strategic and we don't show all of our cards. Because I strongly believe when the does rule, Maduro will go berserk. And that is where we need to then apply all of the measures from our partners while we're in conversation. We got to make sure that those support is tangible, as Dr. Muniram has said. So I believe we need to see as we are seeing the presence, we are seeing the statements, all of that is great for Guyana, and it's reassuring for the Guyanese population. But to go beyond and above to a certain extent at this point in time have to be strategic. That is where I feel we have to trust how the government is engaging its allies and its partners in the region. And we all know there is major stakeholders that is critical to this matter that has to essentially play an integral role in the resolution. So how we go about that, I think the answer to that question has to be very thoughtful, it has to be strategic, and it has to be done in a way where we don't undo the work that is already done behind the scenes, perhaps.
No, I agree with you, uh, Mahendra. But and I think the government, from what I've seen, what the president and so on is doing, right, are making the right moves. As I said earlier, right, the strategy you're adopting is correct, right. But what I'm saying though that we need strong support, right, because as this madman there, right, it seems to me that only strong support will move it.
Yeah, okay. Professor Boudou, as you know, Ghana already has the strong support of the US. They have some joint exercise going on, but there's very limited that the government can say at this point. Plus, the French has certain things, assets.
Mhm.
So, as Mahin said, we got to be very careful.
Mhm.
Let the government handle this. They know exactly what they're doing. As the vice president said, they are monitoring the situation
Mhm.
very carefully. And so let's move on to the comment from Professor Narayan.
Well, at least we all agree on one thing is that we have to have the support. All I agree with Professor Muniram and Mahindra. But if we try to put it in perspective, we have to realize too and be patient that diplomacy takes time.
Mhm.
And diplomacy is not a very visible line of reasoning for us because these are happening in the background or in the behind closed doors, as if we want to put it that way. Now the diplomacy, which I understand, Dr. Tara, as you're mentioning, we cannot we cannot underplay the level of involvement of the Guyana government in a diplomatic resolution. And also, we cannot underplay the support that the Guyana government is currently accruing externally. Because if these are divulged, then it only gives Maduro some alternative for his own actions, which I don't think that he has a planned attack on how to take over the area of Essequibo. As you realize, as we have all seen, he's saying now allowing Venezuelan corporations to go and do the exploration for Guyana's oil. Now, what support is he willing to give to those people? Because those people, if you go into and start exploring Guyana's oil, you are going to be in confrontation, not with Guyana, but with the United States, the United States vested interest, which is Exxon. Exxon has the, the they have the agreement to explore this area. So I do not expect, and even though we would like to see some tangible actions, it is not forthcoming until there is some aggressive response from Maduro. And Mahendra is correct. We don't want to provoke him because provocation is to legitimize his call for his people to invade Guyana. Without provocation, he has no other way of legitimizing himself as to why does he want to go into it. So it is a very complex array of politics as well as the negotiations that are taking place. So we have to be cognizant of all the dynamics that is taking place right now. And Dr. Tara, I agree with you
Mm.
that the support that Guyana is getting, Guyana cannot go and divulge any of those discussions because Guyana would be placing itself at a predicament that becomes vulnerable and which is conducive to what Maduro is planning in his own, because we don't know, he's already an isolate. So we don't know what his plans are. So we just have to wait and see and be patient for diplomacy to work.
All right. Thank you, Professor. Just quickly, let me just ask each one of you. Do you have any evidence, or are you aware of any evidence, historical or cultural, that Essequibo was ever colonized by Venezuela? Anyone, if you have any evidence?
I don't have any evidence,
Okay,
and I told you I was in that
okay,
area for several
okay.
months.
Professor
No,
Narayan?
no evidence, Dr. Tara. But
Okay.
what is interesting? Quickly, I'll say the Orinoco region, which Venezuela celebrates so that it's theirs, was awarded around 1811. So what is good for the goose must be good for the
Yeah.
gander.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if you can recognize
Mhm.
legitimacy for the Orinoco region of 1811, why are
Yeah.
you setting aside the arbitral award of 1899?
Yeah. Yeah. There's the same point the Attorney General was making. Okay. 2 minutes each for your summary. Then I think we have some time to answer some questions if we have any. So let's go with you, Professor Bulu.
Yeah, I think that the Guyana government, as I said, is strategically moving on this, right? And I must applaud them for doing a wonderful job. I've listened to the president, the vice president, and several ministers, and I think they are doing the right thing for Guyana. I strongly support them, and I urge all of us to go behind them. But rather than summarize, I want to make another point that I think is very important, that we don't get drawn into this. The media is trying to draw a comparison between the Guyana Venezuela issue with Russia and Ukraine,
Mhm.
Israel and Hamas, and so on.
Mhm.
This to me is wrong. There's no comparison. The issue is completely different. So our message should be very clear that this issue is between a bellicose dictator in Venezuela trying to negate a legally binding international recognized border agreement with flimsy allegations.
Thank you, sir. Professor Mahin.
Yeah, I just want to echo the sentiments from my colleagues on the panel this evening about the approach that the government of Guyana has employed thus far. We must continue to support that strategy because I think it's the best approach that we have at this juncture as a level of approach to this sensitive matter. I think what we need to also recognize is that we can't sensationalize this matter further than it's already sensationalized. And we have to be responsible across the spectrum, whether we are in Guyana or in the diaspora. We have to speak carefully, we have to be vigilant, but we have to trust the government of the day and we have to lend them our support because you know sensationalizing this would only cause us more trouble than good. So we have to continuously support the government. I think we all know Maduro and Venezuela is clinging on to something that is not going to be substantiated in a court of law. And at the set time, I think, as we have continuously said this evening, Maduro is looking for a probable cause of provocation to act. Once we can take away that from him and apply strategic diplomacy, we are going to dismantle his approach. We can't trust his intention, we can't trust his action, but what we can do is be responsible and be very strategic. And lastly, I want to convey my sympathies and condolences to the family of the five military personnel that passed away so tragically today. I pray for their family and may God provide them the strength in this difficult time.
Thank you very much, Professor. Professor Narayan.
I, uh, I'd like to just um, I'd like to support what Mahendra just said about extending our sympathy to the lost people. But I'd like to pull together what Dr. Muniram said and what Mahendra said, is that and make an appeal to our fellow Guyanese that I have detected some impatience in terms of how we approach this problem. We would evidence of support, but we have to be patient because we ourselves can be the worst of enemies to the cause. And we should not forget that while Maduro is looking for the unification of Venezuelans for his cause, Guyanese are looking towards unification because we are not a unified country. But because of this issue, it has helped to unify Guyana, and we need to stick to that unification without kind of being divisive in our commentaries of how we see what Maduro wants or what we want. Because the answer does not reside with us, it resides with our government and the support, because Guyana cannot go it alone. And so, therefore, we need to be patient rather than being so divisive and derogatory sometimes towards the government. And I have seen some of the derogatory government, and I would like to appeal to my fellow Guyanese, please stop your derogatory and your own commentaries as what you think the government should do. The Guyana government is doing the best it can. And whatever we feel as individuals are not going to help because we think we have resolution to the problem when we do not.
All right, thank you very much, Professor. Now, Shamiza, I don't know if you have any questions.
We have some things that viewers are asking us to discuss tonight. This is from Mr. Lal. He says, will Maduro pursue his threat and send his soldiers to annex and occupy Essequibo? Or he will not send his soldiers to occupy this domain, and why not? I think it's more of a discussion. I'm not sure if we on the panel are equipped to answer these questions, but please go ahead.
But, Professor Mahir, you want to make a
Sure.
shot for that?
I think, there's great uncertainties as to what Maduro is capable and not capable of. At this juncture, we can't not consider that possibility. But I think, again, to recognize the efforts of the government of Guyana is to be proactive and be strategic. If that possibility arises, how do we tackle it? And I think that is the approach that has to be met with that possibility.
Good.
Professor Hari Raj, I know there were. I don't see many questions, guys. I'm seeing mostly comments as to suggestions.
Okay.
So we're asking viewers to ask your questions that you would like, or discussions topic that you feel the panel should be discussing tonight. And we're also asking for your respect. It is free speech, but please be mindful of your comments to others. Mr. Mahadev is asking, why are the panelists not challenging the voting?
Let me quickly respond to that, Shabiza. What that question has to, or the person raising that question has to recognize, is Guyana or Guyanese or any other person external to Venezuela cannot control the internal business of Venezuela. But what we can quickly and lucidly do is recognize the 90% that was reported across the spectrum is just a figment of Maduro's imagination. So whether that vote had acquired 10% or the 90% as reported, it would not have changed the processes that followed and that Maduro employed with the maps and giving the ultimatum to the investors. So we are not in a position to question the internal affairs of Venezuela, but these are the things that is being peddled and promulgated in a way to garner a particular level of response from the government of Guyana.
Well, to add to that, the opposition party says that the turnout was just 11%. 89% of the people did not vote. And if you look at pictures, I got pictures from various sources, including people from living in Venezuela, where the polling booths were empty, several of them. So how they arrive at that there's something that the vice president had commented on that too.
Yeah, well, in a dictatorship, it's hard
Mm,
to
yeah,
it's hard to determine um, like access, voting. It's hard to determine support,
yeah,
and you can, if you're if you're the dictator of a country, you can concoct any evidence you want
yeah.
in support of your position. So we do not have the answer, as
Mm,
the previous speakers have said. And so all we have to go on, like Dr. Tara mentioned, is the absence. Sometimes when you're looking for evidence, it is not the presence of things, but the absence of things that provide the evidence.
mm,
And what I mean by that is that you can say that you win the election, but is there a turnout? It's the absence of turnout that is an indicator of the people who exercise their franchise.
mm. Okay, Shamiza.
Um, Dr. Tara, it's difficult. We have so many comments that are flooding our comments here
You
from
can read out.
YouTube.
You can read out a few, and let's see if we can expand on it or clarify it.
One of the questions that I have here, does the U.S. have security interests in Guyana?
The U.S. has security. I know they have.
Does the U.S. they have security interest in Guyana?
I know they
And
have.
this is from,
Yes, we know they have economic interests. That's for sure.
but
And
security interest is the question.
yeah, well, if they have security, they must have security interests as well because they must have some way to where they can safeguard the assets to defend the assets in case of any kind of attack. So they
Well,
must protect the assets. From that point of view, and they're
there
part
is
of. We have a regional security system as well in the Caribbean, which depends on US to buttress that as well. So from a broader perspective, I would say yes. Go
yeah,
ahead,
while
Professor.
while we can't give full assurance to that comment, we have to go back on the historical evidence that is there. Historically, the United States have maintained that they do not want certain elements in their own backyard. And if you go back to Latin American history, you will see that it is very glaring that whenever there are tensions, one was communism. And we have seen where the United States, today, it's not so much communism, but it's the infiltration of Chinese domination or Iranian um, Iranian attempts to provoke uh, certain nations, or to gain foothold. I'm sorry, to gain foothold in certain nations. All of these things will not be tolerated if you go on the historical precedences that the United States has set, especially in the Caribbean and Latin America. So therein lies our assurance that the United States does have a vested interest in Guyana.
Yeah, I think that they do have an interest because this that is, whole area can be regarded as the backyard of America, right? And they have the Southern Command there, so it would be foolish if America doesn't have security interests in this area.
All right.
Can the UN Security Council send peacekeepers to curb this aggression?
According to Guyana's Attorney General, who looked at the statute, he said yes. That's one of the options open to them. The Attorney General made it very clear on Sunday.
Okay.
But there is no demonstration of that aggression as yet. So the
Yeah,
action,
yeah.
so the,
You can't say it at this point. Mhm. Next, go ahead, Shamiza.
I see someone asked what military support the U.S. and Canada offer to Guyana.
Well, that is something where the government is working on. We don't know the details, but we know that they are getting some level of support. The extent and magnitude, we don't know. That's a security, national security issue, which we are not, which we can't comment on.
Yeah, some of these things are beyond our knowledge or our experience. But if we go on the evidences in the past, remember that in 1983, Reagan overnight sent troops into Grenada. Just at a phone call away, and we just don't underestimate the capabilities of the United States. They have bases not on all over the Caribbean, especially in Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, which are just a couple minutes away. So, and patrolling these areas, one has to be stupid. A Latin American leader has to be very stupid if they are going to, provoke that kind of force on themselves, especially when they're in isolation like Venezuela currently is.
All right. Over to you, Shamiza.
I don't have anything else. I know
Okay.
Mr. Vishnu is asking us to talk about the U.S. Army involvement in Guyana, but as we discussed
No.
earlier, there are certain things we cannot
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
discussion on the panel tonight.
Mm. So I guess we can close the program now.
Well, maybe what we can do is have the panel give their
Final thoughts.
final,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then we can close the program.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
So,
Professor Boudou, start.
Yeah, I think that today's panel discussion always seems to follow the same thread. And again, I want to reiterate my comment that I made at the very beginning. We must support the government of Guyana. I feel that they are making the right moves, again, to repeat myself, and they need our full support. And as you pointed out, there are lots of things that cannot be made public. And from the little that you hear from the various ministers, it is clear there's a lot of things going around this area that are at the moment private and cannot be disclosed because there's too many things that are unknown, and we just have to trust the government that they are doing the right things, and I believe they are.
Thank you, Professor Narayan.
Yeah, when before we make irresponsible comments, whether on the chat or wherever we are, we need to assess the information that is available to us. For example, what the Exxon chief is saying. For example, what the foreign secretary, what the Secretary of State is saying, what the government of the United States is saying, what the Canadian government is saying, what the British government is saying. So while we may be impatient for answers, we should be attentive to what these people are saying, and all of them are in support of Guyana. And Dr. Muniram said it, that we need to trust. We are not the architects of what is going to happen, but we must support the Guyanese government and trust that they are solidifying and formalizing the support, the external support that they are getting. And if we are very patient and we are aware, we will see that they are getting support.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Mahin Hariraj.
quickly, perusing some of the comments here, I want to recognize that, or folks to recognize, Venezuela is not, you know, isolated from the world. from other countries in the world. And it has to operate in that sphere. Whether it accepts it by law or by lawlessness, that's up to its own wishes. But the international community will not stand idle, I believe, in this part of the world and see another country territory being annexed or being usurped without acting, in particular, given the interests we commonly share across the world. We have to recognize we operate and we live on a global platform, and Venezuela has to come to terms that this bully mentality and tactic, they are looking solely to get a level of reaction out of Guyana. And I think, again, the level of maturity and diplomacy is what is holding us at this point in time at a juncture where Venezuela is just running out of options. And we have to continuously employ uh, these strategies and methods. Guyana, as a country, has grown leaps and bounds. We are confronted with an allegation of our territory. The courts will see to that. But at this juncture, we have to act again with maturity, a level of critical, logical thinking, and we can't have plans or levels of actions be publicized when it's a way of us tackling a particular issue. So we have to remain vigilant. We have to be patient, as my colleague would have said on the program. And we got to make sure that we don't fall prey to this narrative and nationalistic perspective that Venezuela is trying to portray and to pull over of us. So we got to make sure that we remain vigilant and we act in a very prudent mannerism and trust the government of Guyana to deal with this and to strategically align itself with its allies. We understand Venezuela is not in its Grenada, but Guyana is not functioning by itself. It's functioning on a global platform. And we have partners, we have allies. We are a part of a democratic, civilized society. We are a law abiding nation, and we will continue to be that.
The claim by Venezuela that they were cheated due to bribery between two of the judges in the 1899 arbitral award. They are trying to focus on that. Now, apart from that, the great difficulty or impossibility, they cannot prove that they ever owned or run Essequibo Coast. It never belongs to them historically, never. It's always managed by the British and the Dutch. And the Dutch was who handed over. So they don't have any evidence. They were given several opportunities to produce evidence. They have failed. As I mentioned in 1961, Dr. Jagan asked them, if you want to reopen this case, go and get your evidence. I will listen to you. That's why they don't regard it as a dispute. The Guyana government regard it as a controversy. Well, Professor Boudou suggests allegation, but controversy was the legal concept they decided to use. I don't know if allegation was strong enough to use in the court of law. But what I can say is that I'm very, very much relieved by the statement by the State Department where the guy said the 1899 is done deal. The only way this could be revisited if the two parties agree to do another agreement. So that is very positive. That is very direct. And I joined with my colleagues in expressing our deepest, profound condolence to the members of the joint services who passed away in this tragic circumstance. At this time, it is very, very unfortunate, but I'm sure the president will give them whatever relief. I mean, no amount of relief really can really help it, but at least can help. The president will try his best to console the family, and I don't know what else. We just have to offer our prayers. And I'll ask Shamiza now to make her final comments. You may have some comments too on this. So let's hear your view.
Thank you, Dr. Tara. Like our panelists, Professor Mahindra said, we're dealing with a bully. And we know that this man is capable of anything. So it's important for us to, be on the lookout for and have an open mind, because anything is possible. And we've seen it over the last few days, weeks. We have seen that he's unpredictable. We have to keep our guard up. And I know our president and all the relevant authorities are working hard. Listening to our Minister of Education last week on this program has given me confidence that we are in good hands. We have our allies that are there for us, and our people are protected. Tonight, our panelists have made their points. All the points are well taken. So thank you very much, Dr. Tara. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, our sympathies, our condolences to the families that the men, or soldiers and men who stood up for us. Tonight is a sad night for all of us. We are mourning their loss, and it's not something that we want to see happen, especially during this tough time for our country. So with that said, my name is Shamiza Ali. I'm your hostess. Until next time, this is the Guyana Dialogue. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you all, panelists. Thank you, Shamiza.
Thank you.